word doctor actually means teacher, and so doctors should be educating their patients and teaching their patients, but unfortunately, the only thing that doctors are taught while they're in medical school is how to prescribe drugs.
We got hours and hours and hours on how to use basically patent medicines, which, as you know, are what usually goes on the prescription pad as a molecule that can be patented, which means it's not found in nature, because you can't patent it if it's not found in nature, if it's found in nature, and that's what we get educated in.
They don't get paid to educate people, they get paid to write prescriptions. And you know, you can imagine the drug lobby made sure that's the case.
The doctor is brainwashed when he gets out of medical school because the medical school has too much subsidization of the professors who are being paid by the drug company. So the professor never teaches any student in medical school, why don't you try vitamin C? They're going to tell them the latest drug.
And that's by design, specifically. You know, there about over a century ago, there's foundations, the Carnegie and the Rockefeller foundations, who sort of engineered the curriculum through their grants and donations.
Are you wondering what Dr. McCullough meant when he mentioned that the Carnegies and the Rockefeller foundations engineered medical school curriculum over a century ago? He was referring to the Flexner Report of 1910, which we covered in our last documentary.
The time of the late 1800s, early 1900s, 20th century, medical schools taught a lot of different things. There were homeopathic medical schools, there were naturopathic schools, there were eclectic herbal type medicine schools, and so it was all there. There was not one way. And what happened was that the Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations were interested in establishing the one way. How would they do that? Well, they would get a hold of the education system and create a medical monopoly via basically eliminating all competition to patent petrochemical medical education. That's the Flexner Report of 1910, it became known. Abraham and Simon Flexner, were hired to do this. It was a preordained commissioned report.
Not surprisingly, the basis of the report was that it was far too easy to start a medical school and that most schools were not teaching sound medicine. Let me translate this for you. These natural health colleges were not pushing enough chemical drugs manufactured by who? Carnegie and Rockefeller. The AMA, who were evaluating the various medical colleges, made it their job to target and shut down the larger respected homeopathic colleges. Carnegie and Rockefeller began to immediately shower hundreds of millions of dollars on these medical schools that were teaching drug-intensive medicine. In return for the financing, the schools were required to continue teaching course material that was exclusively drug-oriented, with no emphasis on natural medicine. By 1925, over 10,000 herbalists were out of business. By 1940, over 1,500 chiropractors would be prosecuted for practicing quackery. The 22 homeopathic medical schools that flourished in the 1900s dwindled down to just 2 by 1923. By 1950, all the schools teaching homeopathy were closed. In the end, if a physician did not graduate from a Flexner-approved medical school and receive an MD degree, then he or she could not find a job anywhere. This is why today MDs are so heavily biased towards synthetic drug therapy and know little about nutrition, if anything.
It's so vitally important for us to understand this history if we were going to answer that question, why is modern medicine so drug intensive? And it's not because patent petrochemical medicine is superior. It's because of monopoly medicine, which was created over 100 years ago.
Very few know that the birth hour of the pharmaceutical industry is actually a deliberate decision by a handful of people on this side and on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean to define disease as a marketplace and build what has now become the largest investment industry upon that simple thought. So cancer is just one element of this unspeakable business of defining diseases as a marketplace. Everything else that you see today around the pharmaceutical industry, the tremendous profits, the inability to eliminate diseases, the propaganda war from that side that they are actually making progress in any disease. All of that comes from the fact that it's a business model, an investment industry that thrives on the continuation of existing diseases and the launching of new diseases.
Yes, modern medicine is a business. And just like any business, the goal is to grow this business and also to eliminate competition and to maintain the monopoly. I mean, heck, even in 1913, the American Medical Association developed an internal department that they called the propaganda department, and its main goal was to eliminate quacks. But what exactly is quackery? I mean, in the United States, our first president, George Washington, he died as a result of bloodletting, and that was an approved treatment of the day. Ignaz Semmelweis was called a quack because he suggested that doctors actually wash their hands before surgery. And physicians today that do not use chemotherapy, they're considered to be quacks. But very few people know the real history of chemotherapy and its origins. The first chemotherapy agents, and even some of the agents that are still used today, are derived from the mustard gases that were used to kill soldiers in the world wars. I mean, this explains why many people, including myself, would never touch chemotherapy. It's just too darn toxic. Maybe one of the reasons that 90+% of oncologists won't do conventional treatments like chemotherapy is that they actually cause cancer. Let's listen to Dr. Veronique Desaulniers, who actually cured her own mother and herself of breast cancer, talk about tamoxifen, which is the most popular drug prescribed to treat breast cancer.
Tamoxifen is a drug that most women are put on when they have breast cancer, but they don't tell them that it's classified as a carcinogen by the American Cancer Society and the World Health Organization. So does it make sense to give women a carcinogenic drug that will cause cancers in other parts of her body to prevent cancer?
We know that 97% of people who undergo chemotherapy are dead in 5 years. That study was placed in the 2004 edition of the Journal of Oncology. It was the cancer doctors telling on themselves. Do I know this study to be true? It was a massive study done by epidemiologists who themselves were doctors.
Does it make any sense to take a therapy, let's use radiation as an example, to take a therapy that we know is dangerous under any circumstance? You break your leg, you break your hand, you go to the hospital, they take you to get an x-ray, they've got the skull and crossbones, they've got the universal triangular radiation sign as a warning. Why is it a warning there? You tell me.
Because it's known that it's harmful.
And how is it harmful?
It damages DNA.
It damages DNA, and what is this consequence of damaging that DNA?
Potentially cancer.
Bingo. So then why would we take something that we know has a very high propensity to create cancer and use that to treat cancer?
It does seem insane to treat cancer with chemotherapy and radiation that actually cause cancer, doesn't it? But doctors are required to do this. As a matter of fact, they suffer adverse consequences if they do not prescribe chemo and radiation. They can even lose their license to practice.
We're all, when exposed to conventional chemo and radiation, going to be harmed, and it is actually going to have a carcinogenic effect, and it will often cause secondary cancers. So technically, I think people need to be aware that this isn't truly a cancer therapy. At best, it's palliative in the sense that it might shrink a tumor, but what really the main thing I would like to get across is that it's going to cause an enrichment of the actual mother cell that's beneath the tumor, which is known as the cancer stem cell. So technically you are shrinking the tumor size, but you're enriching the population of the tumorigenic cells at the very same moment. So again, the idea that some people are resistant to chemo and radiation is really a false concept.
Everyone will have secondary adverse effects from chemo and radiation. Despite this fact, as we've already learned, many doctors from countries across the globe might even lose their license if they do not prescribe chemo and radiation. Are you beginning to see the way that Big Pharma has its tentacles throughout this medical cartel, especially when it comes to chemotherapy?
Having a maximum chance of fighting and overcoming cancer, we need an intact immune system. And that too makes the current approach of chemotherapy so unethical. But every scientist knows that it is a huge fraud. And those who say they don't, they should quit the job of being a scientist.
The immune system is the key to fighting cancer and to health. And one of the interesting things about chemotherapy is that it totally destroys and devastates the immune system. Another unique thing about chemotherapy that many people don't know is that oncologists can actually make kickbacks from prescribing chemotherapy drugs. This is a unique characteristic to the cancer industry that does not apply anywhere else in pharmaceutical drugs.
Oncology is an unbelievably lucrative field of medicine, especially when you're running the business side of it.
Oncology is an incredibly lucrative business, and maybe it's because of this fact that we see stories like the story of Dr. Prva Epizoda in Michigan. He was an oncologist that over the last several years, he was recently convicted of prescribing chemotherapy drugs to patients that didn't need it, many of whom didn't even have cancer, and sadly, many of whom died from the chemotherapy.
He's been sentenced, I believe, to 45 years in prison. Yeah. But the most disturbing thing about this is not that he was caught and that he has been sentenced to prison. The disturbing thing is that there are hundreds of other cancer doctors out there doing the same thing, and they haven't been caught. And they get away with so much deception, violating medical ethics, lying to patients. Most patients never question their doctors because they think the doctor is the sole authority.
The agencies that were designed to protect humanity are protecting the industry they're supposed to protect us from.
Well, any drug that is on the market, available through prescription, that has serious and widespread adverse effects, as they say, was previously declared safe and effective by the FDA. That's the only reason that drug reached the market. So if after approval it suddenly has opposite effects, very dangerous, that's fraud. Fraud at the level of the FDA for not investigating the drug properly or concealing the truth.
And the FDA, on its own website, openly admits that 100,000 plus people die each and every year from properly prescribed prescription drugs.
I'm a German. I didn't learn anything about that. I was 35 years old when I learned about Bayer, BASF, the largest pharmaceutical companies at that time, were actually building or responsible for the extermination camp at Auschwitz. And then I wanted to know more, and there was nothing. So we finally found in the archives of the US, in Washington, the US National Library, the records of case number 6 of the Nuremberg War Crime Tribunals. We are told that there was only one tribunal against the main war criminals, but in fact there were 12. Number 6 was against Bayer, BASF, and Höchst. At that time, they were forming a cartel by the name of IG Farben. And that whole case lasted an entire year against 24 managers of these pharmaceutical and chemical companies. And it showed that they were largely financing the rise of the Nazis to power, that they supplied 100% of the raw materials so that the Nazis could lead their war, including 100% of the synthetic gasoline, rubber, 100% of the explosives. The report came to the conclusion, the US prosecutor said, without IG Farben, World War II would not have been possible.
Big Pharma patents drugs, and they call that medicine. But do patented molecules, this medicine that they've created, does this have a place in modern healthcare? Or I think maybe the bigger question is, can we, as mortal men, improve on nature?
Patent medicines do not belong in human bodies. If we're going to be as healthy as we can in the bodies we now have, we have to use only the substance and energy that belongs in the body.
Standard of care and you give chemo and people die, it's okay. If you don't do the standard of care and people live, that's not okay. It's politically incorrect. So this is the amazing thing. You take a poison, you give it to people, they die. It's part and parcel of the normal status quo, modus operandi. This is how it's supposed to be. Now you break that, you actually do something that's not toxic, you help patients, they live. Hey, we don't care whether the patient lives or not. That's irrelevant. It's not part of the standard of care.
This is a total war. Texas Medical Board is going after my doctors, is going after my assistants. They're suing everybody because of using the treatment which is non-conventional. Not easy to treat these advanced patients because we are continuously being harassed for doing this, okay? Which is incredible. We should be awarded. We should be set up the example. We are saving the lives of people who are sentenced to die. No, We are mercilessly harassed by lawyers, by people who know nothing about treatment, who are stupid puppets of the guys behind who knows very well what we can offer, but are directing these guys like in Nazi Germany, and they are simply obeying orders because they were programmed this way, okay? I think there will be a time when there is some type of Nuremberg trial. So all of these white-collar, nicely dressed lawyers and clerks who are chewing the money of taxpayers, they be held accountable for what they do, because many people died because of their actions.
In 1987, 4 chiropractors from Illinois, particularly Chester Wilk, he was the head chiropractor that took the AMA to court. They actually took the entire American Medical Association to court, accusing them of having a branch within their organization designed to eliminate chiropractic as a profession, a licensed profession they were trying to eliminate through the use of propaganda. Well, a federal district court judge in Illinois, Susan Getzendanner, in 1987 found the AMA guilty of conspiracy. That was the judgment. So if anybody tells you when you're talking about these things, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, you can lead them straight to the Wilk versus the AMA court ruling of 1987, and the judgment was guilty of conspiracy.
Are you beginning to get the picture here? This is not conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact, according to the courts. Now, why are we sharing this with you? Because you must understand the belly of this beast if you're going to believe the truth. One of the many victims of this conspiracy to suppress natural cancer treatments is a man named Jason Vale. Last year, I had the privilege of interviewing him, and he shared with me the true story of how he was arrested, convicted, and spent 5 years in federal prison, not for murder or rape or assault, but for selling an unapproved cancer treatment, namely apricot seeds, which contain Laetrile, on his website. But Jason is not alone. Almost 80 years ago, a scientist named Royal Raymond Rife faced jail time for using an unapproved treatment.
In the 1930s, Dr. Royal Rife, who was a microbiologist, knew that there were microbes inside the cancer cells. And he came up with an electromedicine device, a couple of them actually, which was designed to do nothing but kill the microbes inside the cancer cells. The American Medical Association tried to buy him out, and he refused because he did not trust them. Good for him. And so the Food and Drug Administration went down and destroyed his laboratory, his equipment, destroyed all of his inventory.
In the end, Dr. Rife's lab was burned, his records were stolen, his life was ruined, and he eventually died of a drug overdose. Harry Hoxsey is another example of a man who was treating and curing cancer naturally that was heavily persecuted.
And basically what everything spins around, it's what is known as the Hoxsey formula. It's a liquid made with a combination of several herbs and minerals, and it, because of the way that it's put together, it selectively targets only the malignant cells. Any cell with a bad DNA or a bad metabolism, those are the ones that are going to be destroyed. Okay. Of course, there's a few vitamins, there's a diet, which is not a difficult one to follow, and we also use a lot of herbal, both Occidental and Chinese herbal formulas.
The formula that you're using, is this pretty much the same formula that Harry Hoxsey used?
Exactly the same.
80, 100 years ago?
Exactly the same.
So if somebody comes into the Hoxsey clinic here and they want treatment, how long does the treatment typically last?
This is a clinic that does something in a different way than most of the regular clinics. We try to do everything on a single day. People come in the morning, they get registered, they go through the laboratory, they go through the x-rays, they get their consultation, a very thorough physical examination, and then we have to wait until we get the reports from laboratory x-rays, which takes a couple of hours, and then we call people up for a second visit in the afternoon, and we explain all the findings to them. We give them their treatments, and they just pick up their supplies and make their payments and go home, same day. This is something you can do at home. You don't have to be necessarily hospitalized to do it, you know. And they stay on the diet, and they come back for a checkup every 6 months, every year. Eventually, just come back every 2-3 years.
Okay. Being a one-day treatment, the Hoxsey treatment, relatively affordable?
I think so. I think we're the cheapest clinic in town.
Are you really?
Oh yeah.
I'm a pharmacist by my profession, so I've been practicing that for about 20 years. So when my daughter was diagnosed, about 3 years ago, we decided, the whole treatment was just huge and barbaric, and it's just, and the options was just very limited. And we, I think I ran that by you at that time. There was just, the prognosis was less than 20%. Amputation was almost definite. When the swelling happened, that's where the mistake number one. We went to the emergency room. At that point, I thought, well, look, they didn't have significant successes with that. And I thought that, you know, on an ethical standpoint, if you don't have very much, you shouldn't be doing that much. And that's what I thought. I didn't think that they would pursue such, aggressive means to get it. And at that point, the doctor was, again, depending on who you get, we had a physician that was very stubborn, thinks that he has all the answers, didn't know anything about what we were approaching.
They kept Selena.
Oh, yeah. Selena with they had armed guards at that point because they knew where my mind was at.
They had armed guards at her room.
On her room. They knew where my mind was at, because my mind was to take her back to the facility of my choice. Right. And the facility that would, you know, give her a chance at have some sort of a normal life. They came with their lawyers and they said that if you don't sign consent, we're going to take custody of the child. And the custody was given to the state, and then
so they took custody of
yeah,
Selena.
Correct. Yeah, and then they started aggressive chemotherapy at that point. This is documented. And every time about 8 white coats come into the room, look at her wound getting bigger and bigger with every dose. As much as I pleaded and as much as I saw, the wound got so big, got infected with MRSA. Then in the end, an amputation was required. After that point, we still didn't have custody after the amputation for another 6 months. We have custody now.
The Department of Children and Families was called because we were wasting time, according to the doctors. They wanted me in for chemotherapy a week after my biopsy was done at Hartford. And they came in and they took me because they said that I had to get the chemo. And
what do you mean they said that, when you say they took you?
They came into my house in October around Halloween, and they said that I had to go with them.
And who is they?
The DCF workers.
Okay, so they actually came into your home and took you from your...
Yeah, they had about 12 police squad cars surrounding my house and the block, and they basically just came into my house and said, we have to go. My mom wasn't even home. I was hiding in my closet upstairs because I had no idea what was going on. And
were you the only one at the house?
Yeah, I called my mom crying, and she came home immediately to police and DCF workers surrounding our house. After about 2 weeks of being in the hospital, going through courts and judges, they got the order that they could force me to do the chemotherapy. And at that point, I was in the hospital. I couldn't leave my room. There was a guard sitting outside of my door. I couldn't use my phone. I couldn't contact my mom. And basically, it came down to one morning they came in and they strapped me to the bed and they sedated me for surgery.
Really?
Yes. Because you have to have a port to have chemotherapy, which is why I have a scar.
And you didn't want a port?
No, because I didn't want the chemo. They came in to insert an IV and I said no. So they had to have the officers and the security guards and the staff come in, and they brought in a bed that had straps, and they had to tie me down by my wrists and my ankles. And a woman came in and they put a needle in my neck to knock me out. And the next thing I knew, I woke up and I was in the recovery room.
Well, I would like to know, how is that any different from Nazi Germany, when people were put into concentration camps and experimented on, or forced to do certain things? I don't know what the difference is.
This is unacceptable. This is incompatible with a free society. And frankly, the doctors that engage in that kind of activity, and the hospital staff that strap people down and force chemotherapy into these children, they should be arrested. They should go to jail, just like this other oncology doctor who's serving 50 or 45 years in prison now.
Big Pharma may need this cancer investment industry to continue so that the money keeps flowing in. But our goal with The Truth About Cancer is exactly the opposite. We want to eradicate cancer once and for all. And that's why we've shared these truths with you today. Maybe they've been a little bit difficult to believe, but they are the truth. Has your perspective changed on this? I hope that it has, because the perspective that most people have when they hear cancer is that cancer is a death sentence. And our message is exactly the opposite. Cancer is not a death sentence. There is always hope. I thank you for watching tonight's episode, and I can't wait to see you for the next one. In the meantime, get some rest, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in tonight. God bless all of you.